Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Game for Thought live stream of the second semester right here at Howest Digital Arts and Entertainment. My name is Allie Weiss, and I am our ethics coordinator in international game development right here at Digital Arts and Entertainment, more commonly called DIE. In true DIE fashion, we are streaming this right here on Twitch. So for all of you joining us from Belgium, from outside of Belgium, a big welcome, and we can't wait to bring you tonight's panel discussion. If you're just scrolling through Twitch and you see this and you're like, what's Game for Thought? No worries, I got you covered. I'll go over just a brief overview of what this series is all about. So here at DIE, we started the Game for Thought live stream last academic year. And so the focus of this live stream is to come on Twitch every month and discuss a different socially relevant, ethically relevant topic concerning the game and digital entertainment industry. Sometimes in such a highly technical industry, it's difficult to make space for these really important discussions about these socially relevant things. So we're joining you again for yet another stream. The topic this month is going to be accessibility in games, a really important topic, extremely relevant, and we are really excited to bring you tonight's discussion. Joining us for the guest presentation will be Tara Voelker. Tara is the accessibility lead at Xbox Game Studios over in the US. We also have a really wonderful panel tonight, including Tara, Dr. Amy Cavanagh, joining us from the UK. She is a disability activist and also a content creator right here on Twitch. We also have Dr. Katherine Gurley. She is a professor of computer science and also the co-director of the E-Media Research Lab at KU Leuven, located right here in Belgium. And we have three of our very own students joining the panel as well. Props to them for joining this panel and, yes, spending their evening with us discussing these ethically relevant topics in the game industry. We have Ian Dufrey. Ian is a game development student right here at DIE. It's also his last year, so at the end of the semester, we will bid farewell to Ian. We also have Joao de Seger. This is Joao's third Game for Thought stream, so welcome back, Joao. He is a game graphics production student. And last but not least, we have Tim Vermont. Tim is a game development student, just like Ian. So again, we're really excited to continue this live stream series and bring you tonight's discussion about accessibility in games. We'll start with a guest presentation from Tara, just to give us a brief overview of accessibility and what it means for us in the game industry. Then we'll take just a little bit of a break, and then we have our panel discussion. The first part of the panel discussion will cover pre-submitted questions from our students and beyond. And then about halfway through, we'll move into the audience Q&A. So really important to know, you can submit a question for the panel at any time during the stream. Just be sure to put a Q before your chat, your comment, so we are sure that it's a question, and then we can go ahead and ask it during the panel discussion. We can't wait for this evening. Thank you for joining us. And without further ado, Tara joining us from the US. Tara.
This side looks good. This side looks flat. Why are you doing
Alrighty, Tara. Hello, hello. We are so excited for your presentation on the basics, what we should know about accessibility in games. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to share this. And basically, so that everyone here knows, we figured it would be great to sort of go and share a little bit about what accessibility is before the panel started, so that if you were perhaps unsure, you would be in the know, so it wouldn't catch you completely off guard. So to introduce myself, hi, I'm Tara, as Ali mentioned, and I'm the Xbox Game Studios accessibility lead, meaning that I work with all of our first-party studios to help them plan and design their accessibility features in games. And it is a very unique approach because we have some studios that have 30 people per project and some that have 300. But going on from there, I'm also the co-director of the Game Accessibility Conference, a free conference that is online, that is fully dedicated to the topic of game accessibility. If you're interested in registering, you can actually sign up for the next one, which is the European edition, at GAConf.com. And that's going to be April 11th and 12th, and all about game accessibility. But not about me. Enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about what accessibility in games actually is. And to start that, I actually want to back the conversation up even further. So before we talk about accessibility, we need to talk about disability and what is a disability. Now, first off, when you ask that question, you may be surprised to hear that you're going to get different answers based on who you ask. So, I personally, along with the rest of Microsoft and a lot of other accessibility advocates, follow this social model, meaning that a person's medical conditions or use of assistive technology doesn't mean they have a disability. It's when they interact with the world and something prevents it, when there's a mismatch. So, if you think, for example, a person who has cerebral palsy, that's a medical condition. That's not a disability. A person who uses a wheelchair for getting around easier, the wheelchair is not a disability. That's actually an amazing assistive device that allows freedom to them to do and go places that maybe they couldn't unassisted. But what could be a disability and what frequently happens are the mismatches between that person and their abilities, like using a wheelchair and then coming up to an old building that only has stairs and no ramps. They wouldn't have any problems doing something that everyone else is if only, the societal expectation of stairs when this building had built hadn't stopped them from being able to do what they were doing. Now, when you think about the mismatch being the cause of a disability, that can mean a lot as game designers and game builders in general, because you realize that we are the ones creating the product. And so that if there is a mismatch, then we may be the one essentially causing the disability in this regard. And we all know how much we love gaming, otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? And so that can be a lot to bear. But you know what? That's okay. We can fix this and we can be intentional. And it really can impact a lot of people. So, obviously, in the US, talking about American statistics, you know, 56.7 million Americans have some form of a disability according to our last census data. But what's even more interesting is that a number doesn't catch everything that may cause a mismatch in video games. So, it doesn't catch things like color blindness or a low reading age or what is referred to as a temporary impairment, like a broken arm. All of that can still be impacted. And what's amazing is that gamers with disabilities are overrepresented in the gaming market based on some surveys. So, using one definition of people who had disabilities, a survey by Casual Games, they found that 20.5% of gamers in their survey identified as having a disability, but using that same statistic and definition against the general population is only 15.1%. So, gamers with disabilities are actually overrepresented compared to normal demographics. But like I said, gaming is, all about having challenge. And there has to be some sort of challenge there for it to be a game. If there's not a challenge, it's just a narrative. Still fine. But we have to think about how we play games to be able to think about how accessibility really comes into play. and how disabilities are created in video games. So, what is the 3-step process in playing video games that all of us go through? The first step is receiving info. We are interacting with the video game and we are seeing things, we are hearing things, in some cases with haptics, we're even feeling things, and we are taking in all of that information. When we take that information in, we go to step 2. We are going to process and determine our response. We're going to take in all of that information that we just received and we are going to figure out what we are going to do next. Once we have that info, we provide an input back to the video game. We do something with our hands, in some games it's speech, whatever. We input back to the game to complete that action. And then we repeat that entire process again, starting receive more info, process and determine response, and provide output. For some games, this is incredibly, incredibly fast. For other games, not as much, and that is totally fine. But for every game that we play, that is the exact process that we're going to go through. How a disability or a mismatch occurs in video games is when that flow gets interrupted, and that's where we need accessibility. So let's have a very specific example here to kind of walk you through what I'm talking about. Let's say someone is colorblind. They are playing a fast paced game where they are going to be seeing enemies, they're going to be shooting enemies, they're going to be, trying their best to win. But let's say our player is colorblind and they're looking at the minimap and they could only see red and green to denote who's enemies. But they're red green colorblind. So for them, it looks the same. It's just kind of the same weird brownish shade. They don't know what to do. So when receiving information, they are essentially blocked off. They cannot receive all of the information they need to move on to step 2. Without the necessary information, when they go into processing and determining a response, they may choose to do the wrong thing because they don't have all of the needed information. So, in our case, if someone may not be able to tell the difference between a goodie and a baddie, it may mean they run towards the baddie and then they die, interrupting that flow. But each step of how we play games can be impacted. If you're thinking about visual and auditory examples, being low vision, colorblind, blind, hard of hearing, deaf, all of those can affect you taking in information auditorily or visually from a game. And if you don't have that information, it can mess up step 2. But there are things that can impact step 2 independently. Having ADHD, autism, or even a sensory processing disorder, it may fully shut down or make that processing even harder to be able to do. And of course, in step 3, for providing a response, there are also things, whether someone's quadriplegic, perhaps they have an amputation, maybe they have a stroke, maybe for some video games they're stutter or they're nonverbal, meaning communication's different. Each one of these areas can be impacted, and it's our jobs as game developers to figure out how can we solve in each of these areas to create accessible
Tara,
experiences.
I am so sorry to interrupt you. Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Okay, so it
Yes.
looks like we are having a slight inconvenience with your camera. But it's
No.
not a worry. Maybe you can just try to turn it off and turn it back on. Classic
Let's do the old off
fixie.
and on again.
It works.
Anything?
Hey, proof
Hey!
that the turn off, turn back on, it works.
You know what? It always works. I mean, that's the number one IT solution.
Okay, I'm out. Keep going, keep going.
Oh man. Look, it's not a stream if there isn't some sort of technical difficulty. Like I was saying, it's our job as game developers to think about how can we ensure if someone is having difficulties on any 3 of these steps to create solutions that allow them to play. Basically, we need to think about unintentional challenges. For game development, like I said, there has to be a challenge. And our job is to think about our intended level of challenge for the player. But what happens with gamers with disabilities is there is a extra level of difficulty on top of our intended challenge. Things that we didn't think about in that 3-step process are adding additional challenge. And we have to make sure that the reward equals the amount of challenge posed to the player. And when games aren't accessible, the amount of challenge to complete a task is so great that the reward will never be worth it and they won't play. So we have to think about how can we only target the intentional challenge that we want and get everything else out of the way. There's a saying that we use at Xbox a lot called if you do not intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. And really, you make sure you are removing these unintended barriers to be intentionally inclusive. Now, I didn't budget time for Q&A, but I went through that way faster than I thought I would. But I believe I had more minutes if there were questions in chat specifically about this presentation uh, before we went on to the panel. Well, let's see. Question. What does Terra... Oh, that feels like a great panel question, Cockney Charmer. I don't know if we should go right there, but thank you for calling me awesome. I do have a Spirited Away tattoo. Personalized. Okay, so here's a question about personalized controllers would be a very useful thing if they didn't exist already. So there are two types of ways that we can help gamers with disabilities. One is definitely going to be things that are customizable on their end. There's going to be customizable hardware and customizable software. Customizable hardware has to play nice with customizable software and vice versa. So as game devs, I can know that a player has the Xbox Adaptive Controller, but the player having the Xbox Adaptive Controller doesn't mean that they are going to be fully unblocked due to challenges in the game. Yes, this will remove some challenges and allow them some customization, but if my game doesn't have remappable controls or I require button spamming, having a customized controller may not necessarily solve all of our challenges. But I don't really see any other questions, so I guess we could head into our short break a little early. Um, but if like I will talk up here forever, guys. This is literally my job.
Okay,
Ooh,
Tara? Hey,
yeah,
Tara. Let's go into a short break then, and then we'll be back in a second. Thank you so much. It was awesome.
awesome. Again, I'm like so sorry. I accidentally went so fast. I think that's just what happens when I don't have the
Alrighty.
I don't.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We are ready to jump in to the next part of this stream, which is our audience Q&A and panel discussion. Tara, thank you so much for that wonderful little introduction. Just so we dip our toes into the topic of accessibility in games before we have this panel discussion. If you're just joining us now, welcome. Hello. This panel is about accessibility in games. We're really happy that you made it here on Twitch tonight. First of all, we'll go around and briefly introduce ourselves so you know exactly who is who on the panel. I'm just going to go from whoever is first on my screen, and then I'll work my way around. Amy, I see you first, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hey, I'm Dr. Amy Cavanagh. I'm a blind activist, consultant, content creator. I am on the future class of the Game Awards this year, which was very exciting and very unsurprised. I'm very surprised. I didn't know it was going to happen. And I play video games. I'm not a dev. I'm not a clever, fancy studio person. I'm a gamer. I'm a gamer that talks about gaming accessibility. And I work with Tara and other colleagues. And I am joined this evening by you, obviously, but also by guide dog Ava, who has just finished eating and is having a little nap.
Nice.
So Ava is my guide dog, or seeing eye dog, as the Americans call them. And so she's hanging out as well. She might make noise in the background.
Messages show love in the chat for Ava.
Yeah, Ava on my stream. So I do stream. I'm the blind button masher on stream, and there is an Ava cam at all times on the stream. So, I mean, mainly she naps. She doesn't do a lot.
You know what? She's one of us. She's truly one of us. Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. I just called you Ava. Amy. And thank you, Ava, as well. Awesome. I will go to who is next on my screen. So I see Ian.
Hello, that's me. Hey, so I'm Ian. Some of you who are watching the stream may know me. I'm a game developer at Howest DAE, studied bachelor game development, so mostly the programming side, not the art side. And I'm about to graduate this year, and I'm gonna start doing my internship. Unfortunately, it's been delayed. I was already supposed to start yesterday, but I'm moving to Manchester to work at Cloud Imperium Games. And I've been very passionate about design, and I'll actually be doing a technical design position at Cloud Imperium Games. Otherwise, I just love games in general. I've been gaming since I was like 5 years old, growing up with all the consoles, got a bunch of myself, and I'm just very interested in how accessibility, like this panel seems super interesting, how accessibility can change the course of design and how they can alter games, and how even certain games can be made to bring awareness for accessibility, or just in general make it like more fun experience for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ian. And we're sure you're going to do great at your internship as soon as it begins. The next person I see on my screen is another one of our students at DIE, Joao. And this is, by the way, Joao's third time on the stream. Yes. Third time's the charm, Joao.
Yes, I'm a GGP student. I'm in my second to last year currently. And I care a lot about accessibility because it's important for everyone to be able to play games. So I've been making games in 3D art for like 9 years now. I'm very interested in those aspects of it. So that's why I'm on the stream now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Joao. Super happy to have you on as always. All right, next I see Katherine. Hello, Katherine.
Hi, I'm Katherine Gurley. I'm a professor of computer science at KU Leuven, and my research group looks at human-computer interactions, so how people interact with computers. And we particularly focus on games and also on disability and how that all plays together. I did spend some time working in the games industry many, many years ago. And I do still play some games when I do find the time out. Mostly it's now watching my kid play games, wishing I would be the one who was actually in control in that second.
Living vicariously. Yeah. Love to see it. Awesome. Super happy to have you here joining us from Leuven, Katherine. Next up, you heard from her before and you will hear from her again. Tara, welcome back.
I'm back. And for now, a functioning camera. We'll see how this, how long that lasts. So if you missed it earlier, hello, I'm Tara. I'm the Xbox Game Studios accessibility lead, meaning I work with all of our different studios to help them make and reach their accessibility goals. And I am also the co-director of the Game Accessibility Conference, a 2-day conference fully dedicated to the topic of accessibility and disability in gaming. The next one is actually April 11th and 12th, free online, being hosted from GMT hours. So if you're interested, sign up today. Some of our previous speakers include this amazing woman, Dr. Amy Cavanagh. So just to prove that we have top quality content. But yeah, I just talk about accessibility all the time. It's literally my job. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome.
Speaking at it again this year as well.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I'm hosting a panel again this year.
I will be virtually attending. So I can't wait as well. Awesome. Thank you, Tara. And last but not least, again, we have Tim.
Yes, hi. I am Tim. I am a 20-year-old, also a game dev student, just like Ian, only I'm not in my last year, I'm in my second to last year. I am someone who has been diagnosed with ADHD since I was like 16-ish. And yeah, I can't wait to have this talk about accessibility.
Great. We're super happy to have you on the panel, Tim. Before we get started, before we jump into the questions for today that our students and then those of you from beyond our student community have submitted beforehand, I'd also like to point out that we have 3 fabulous women on the panel from 3 different countries. So that's super cool. We're going for a more, again, international vibe here at Game for Thought. So really excited to be able to come together from all across the world. It's a cool thing that the pandemic has kind of prompted us to take advantage a bit more. So we will dive into these pre-submitted questions again. If you have a question for the panel, don't forget to put it in the chat. Just put a Q beforehand so we know it's a question for our lovely panel, and we will get back to you a little bit later. First question, we'll start kind of with understanding the basics and also misconceptions. So Tara gave us a really wonderful introduction about this. We'll dive into it just a little bit further. So the first question that I see that was submitted says, what exactly do we mean by accessibility? Tara, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but yeah, I'd love to hear more about what accessibility means to you as either students or consumers, for people just who like to play games, for industry professionals and so on. So what does it mean to you? And also I have a follow-up question. Does it also refer to socioeconomic status in addition to ability status? So if anyone would like to take that one away, you are very welcome.
I can take that one.
Awesome.
So I actually was just having a conversation. I'm going to tackle the question backwards. I was actually just having a conversation the other day on whether or not economic status could it be considered something that would impact accessibility/disability. In my little presentation, I talked about that a disability occurs when there's a mismatch between you and the world around you and factors around you. And these can include societal factors. So if you are someone who is low capital in a capitalistic society, it can create those mismatches. I understand how we got there. Yes, if you are directly applying it in that regard, I think that's true. And I do think it's something that we should explicitly consider. I tend to not lump that into accessibility conversations. I tend to put that into inclusive design conversations and guiding teams through when we're making a product. We need to make sure that we're considering all sorts of different areas, from kind of more traditional accessibility, vision, hearing, neurocognitive ability, like mobility, like literal like accessibility ones that we've had, but also considering things like your socioeconomic status, your race, your gender identity, and targeting to be inclusive of all of them. So do I, in my day-to-day work, talk about that? It does come up, but not all the time. To be honest, we have so many things that need fixed, but that are before that, that I normally don't even get to have that conversation. So to kind of loop it back around, for me, accessibility is in video games is exclusively about working to remove those unintentional barriers that are preventing certain people from being able to enjoy the core design of a product, and working to intentionally include people with disabilities. So that's how I approach it. That's how I tackle it. And yeah, so I like where they were going with the question, and I do think it's something we need to be intentional about. But we've just got so much stuff in front of it, at least in my day-to-day job, that yeah.
Sure. Would anyone
Yeah.
else like to piggyback off of that really quickly?
I mean, for me, it's as simple as if I buy a game, can I play it? Like, not am I going to get stuck? Not am I going to be, struggling against the first boss? It's literally, can I physically play it? And I have so many experiences of being really hyped, being really excited for a game, getting that pre-download, opening it up, and nope, can't play it. Can't play it. The menu's too small. I had that experience with God of War. I looked at all the hype around God of War and I thought, oh, this is my perfect game. It's narrative, it's beautiful, it's creative, it's character led. Couldn't play it. Menus,
Thanks.
tiny menus. Couldn't play it. And it's so heartbreaking. And that is not an intention of the designer or the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's what gaming accessibility is about.
Right. I have a follow-up question actually for Amy off of that, but I'm going to wait until we get to the relevant section of our discussion. But yeah, that's a really great point. So for you, for consumers that need accessibility features, it's actually, can I literally play this game? And that's what it means to you. Yeah, great point. Ian, I think you wanted to mention something as well.
Yeah, I think something interesting which I've been seeing happening in games lately as well, which is it's not necessarily disability, maybe it is, but it's regarding phobias. There are a bunch of games where people, for example, I don't know if you know Satisfactory, but that one of the developers actually during developing, they had a severe case of arachnophobia, so they kind of had a arachnophobia mode in the game where they turned all the spiders into pictures of kittens. And they left that in the game for people to play, and if they're too scared, they would just see kittens instead. And then you have games such as Sea of Thieves, for people who have a phobia of the sea or under the water. They have a mode where they can stay afloat in the water, and you wouldn't go down. So I think it's, in my opinion, interesting to also note and see if phobias may also count as accessible and making games more accessible in that way.
They totally do. So when you think about cognitive and processing, barriers can occur there. And a phobia is something that causes an aversion that stops your processing. So literally, it's a issue in step 2 of our 3-step flow. So when we think about things like trigger warnings, removal of certain features, it being able to blur or hide things, like it is allowing you to process the information. Because when you are hit with a phobia, you can't process. Like the phobia is an irrational fear that I have a phobia of spiders under circumstances. It's a weird phobia, but you cannot process the information correctly anymore. Like your brain just short circuits. And so when you provide something for the people with phobia, it is literally an accessibility thing. You're removing that unintentional barrier of you no longer being able to process to continue your 3-step flow.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
I talk about this at work all of the time.
No, it's super interesting. I agree. You basically, because for certain people, when you have a phobia, you just kind of like you said, short circuit. You do a full stop and you're unable to play. So like being able to prevent that so they can continue the game is indeed making it more accessible.
Yeah, and it's also, I apologize for my sporadic smiling throughout this. It's only because I see a cattail. So that is the explanation there. But it's something, I'm so glad that you brought up phobias, because it's something that I came across when I was preparing for this panel, and it's something that as a consumer, it might not be the first thing that you think of. However, for people that this really dominates, their environment and their experiences with their environments, it really matters. So for games to include these really, I think, incredible features, it tells them that their experiences are valid. And although so many people don't think of that as something that game should include, I think it's amazing. Tim, Joao, Katherine, anything to add there? What accessibility means to you as either a student or Katherine as a professor and a researcher?
Yeah, I think from a research perspective, and it nicely links with the phobias actually, like it shows that there's physical access, and I think that's something that we often intuitively think of when we think, oh, game accessibility. Can I use the controller? Can I like remap the controls or something like that? But I also think there's so much to be said about experiential access. So is it an equitable experience? Can I actually play the game in the same way as a non-disabled person would have been able to play the game? Am I represented in the game adequately as well? Do I feel welcomed into the game world? So I think in terms of game content, there's so much that can be done in that space as well. That has nothing to do with the bare like, can I play this game? But it's more about how can I play that game once I get to the point of having the basic access in place.
Right. Great points. And I also, I really like how you mentioned the back end, the development of the game, but also what we see in the game, the content that we see in the game, and are there people or characters or elements that represent us and our experience as well. That's a really great point. I see we momentarily lost Tim, I believe, but Tim, I believe he'll be back. Joao, anything to add?
Well, I think because the question also mentioned like socioeconomic. So I think because we're all like from a first world country, you don't really think about like, well, maybe I can afford to buy one game if I'm maybe disabled, and like how can I afford the extra things that I might need to be able to play those video games? Like I know the Xbox adaptive controller has been really amazing and all of those accessories as well, but they're not particularly cheap. Like I think the adaptive controller is $200. It might be more expensive in like somewhere like South Africa or something, and then the accessories as well kind of add to the price, while I can just buy a controller for $60, right? So some people might be not might be poor or just don't have the money to buy a game and also like all of the stuff they need to actually play it well as a blind or a disabled person on another level. So I think I can't really talk about it because we're first world's like privileged kind of, but I think it is an interesting part of the question where it's like, well, how do you make it accessible to those people? I don't really know actually, but it's a good question.
Yeah, great point. It also echoes a bit, and actually, a lot of this discussion echoes our last stream about the metaverse. And also, one of the questions was economically, how feasible is this for the general public to take part in? And also questions about virtual reality. So yeah, awesome point, Joelle. Tim, I see you are back, I think. Tim, I'm reading in the chat, Tim's Wi-Fi is down. So Tim might be freezing a little bit. Tim might be in and out a little bit. We will see. Tim, I hope it all goes well for you. Thank you so much. Really, really great inputs already. We will move to the next question, which I actually I find very interesting. I don't know the answer to this as someone who does not work in the industry, so perhaps this might be a good one for Tara or Katherine or Amy. So the question reads, where does accessibility fit within the game design or development process? So these questions of accessibility, are they fully integrated within the entire scope of the development process? Or does it tend to be more so of an afterthought? So is the game developed and then me as a developer, I ask myself at the end, okay, now for accessibility. Are there any features we can add to this game? How does that go if you are on the development end?
I can take a stab at this. So I want to say, first off, there is best case, the best way to do it, and then also reality where some studios are. Those are not always the same answer. Because being able to do the best case scenario requires prerequisite knowledge about inclusive design and accessibility that you may not have. So excuse me, Leon, in theory, if you are doing it the best way, thinking about accessibility and inclusive design starts from day one. You start your planning, it's part of your resource gathering, your design docs, literally thinking about how to be intentionally inclusive. So, to use a really simple example, if when you are building out information about how you're planning your user interface, if you are intentional about being colorblind friendly, you don't have to go and later add a colorblind mode because you were intentional at the very beginning. And then you can also work to solve problems earlier in the development cycle by getting feedback. And when you work in game development, you know it's way easier to address that stuff really, really early on in development. When you do things like that, that's how you wind up with, like, not to be excited about my own products, like Forza Horizon 5. If you look at the delta between Forza Horizon 4 and Forza Horizon 5, you can see the difference in the products and their approach. Accessibility was built in every step of the way. More people can play that Forza than ever before, and it's going to be launching American Sign Language and British Sign Language in an upcoming patch, all because of ideas that came at the very beginning of development. Of course, that is not always what is going to happen. We all have issues with resources, timing, our literal knowledge level about accessibility, or even how to approach user research to get people with disabilities in your playtest. So sometimes we are going to have a retrofitting effort, and that won't solve all of the problems, but it can still make a huge difference. Sometimes the delta between being able to play and not be able to play can be solved with an option, but that's not always the case. So the reality is that game development has a little bit of both. You should always try to have it at every step of the way. But again, if you don't have someone in your studio who's mindful of it, who's not going to be reminding you, if you don't have a strong user research team to support you, it may end up being something that comes late. And don't get me wrong, like, late is better than never. But
Right.
it again, best case and real world don't always exactly line up. But when they do, it's fantastic. That's how you get your Last of Us 2s. That's how you get your Forza Horizon 5s. Like, it can happen, and it does happen. And it also happens for indies, and I know there's a question on that later, but I just wanted to say, like, just
Right.
because you're not a huge dev team, like, don't think that you can't do it from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And so it's also, I hear from you, Tara, that it's also a question of resources. And if getting to it every single step of the way is, a possibility in terms of resources that a team has.
It can't. So it's a complex question. So retrofitting almost always takes more resources because of you have to undo work you've previously done, or your solutions. I mean, they're all additive, so by definition, they are more work. In terms of resources, like, you can be one person and make a huge difference, but what you need to do is have that accessibility knowledge or be intentional about it. So if you are someone who doesn't know a lot or hasn't talked to someone about accessibility and you are on your own, the resource you're lacking is the knowledge. And so you still have to make an effort to get that knowledge. But if you're just like a singular person working on a game and you're like, well, I want to make a game accessible, and then, like, you just live on your island and you don't even talk to a person with a disability to hear their lived experience, like, you're not going to get far. It doesn't matter how, like, well-intentioned you are in your heart if you don't do anything about it. Does that make sense?
Right, exactly. So intention is important, but action on that intention is just as important. And also listening to the people that are directly impacted by these things.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think, like was mentioned, like sometimes you don't have the resources for it. But I think there are some cases where if you think about it a bit more, you can build a feature or a set of features that also helps non-disabled people. Like a good example that you see now in a lot of games is a ping system. If you are mute or you just don't like using your mic, a ping system allows you to communicate perfectly with your teammates without actually having to speak with them. So that's great for me because I don't like talking to people online a lot, but also for someone who can't speak, they can use that ping system to effectively communicate with their teammates. So it's like it's a great feature for people who are disabled or people who are able. So when you think about those kind of things, you can kind of use your resources smartly to make your game better for everyone, really.
Yeah, really great point, Joel. And I think also it ties into the fact that this is also an ongoing process. So if a game and if a development team, I guess, then chooses to rework a game, then it is a possibility. All right. So I'll jump in. Yeah, go ahead.
I had another thing maybe to ask regarding this question. Is Tara, you mentioned that some accessibility features were mentioned or already planned before development, like way in the beginning. At what point do we consider certain disabilities or accessibility features standard in games? Like at what point, for example, subtitles are a very big standard in certain games because they allow for deaf people to also enjoy the story, and then they have accessibility for sounds. They also dictate the sounds of what can be played in games. At what point would there be a certain other disability considered standard where they would already need to be considered in the beginning of development?
Again, I think this is the differentiation between what should happen and where we are as an industry. Everyone should be considered from day one. Right now, who is considered per project, per studio, per publisher, it really varies. Like right now, people with low or no vision are getting more attention than they ever have before. And that is specifically being spurned by actually legislation in the US around digital communications. And so, would that have been like, if you had asked me before the CVAA, like, which group should be considered first? Like, I don't know which one I would have picked, but I can tell you the reality is now that there's legislation, well, it's blind and low vision because you could get fined by the FCC if you don't. So it's been a weird double-edged sword situation, and it's great that this policy has pushed gaming forward, whether they were ready or not. But it's also mean that a lot of people are learning about accessibility and disability for the first time in like a let's not get sued manner, which also isn't great. So the benefits and drawbacks. But in terms of making things standard, it's really, really hard. So like even subtitles require a feature in a game that every game may not have. Unpacking, a great game with some amazing accessibility, doesn't have any spoken words, so it doesn't have subtitles. Minecraft, a game with a lot of accessibility options, doesn't have spoken word, therefore doesn't have subtitles. And so trying to make a standard can be very difficult because games are different. However, there are efforts that are going along in the industry to try to showcase what best case examples should be or things that we should strive for. Like Xbox specifically, we have out the Xbox accessibility guidelines on things we think people should consider roughly. When we also introduced the new tags into our Microsoft storefront to let players know, like, hey, this game has subtitles, but having subtitles doesn't mean they're good subtitles. So like we have a standard of these subtitles have to also XYZ, like they have to be a certain size, they have to be a certain contrast. So even then, like not all features are like not only are features not all standard, the features that do exist out there don't have a standard.
Yeah.
But I guess so that's a really long-winded way of saying I don't have an answer for you.
No, I get that. No, it's
That's how I like
it
to
was
do
kind
my
of a difficult
answers.
question. I was just kind of curious on if there were any, like you mentioned, like any legal things on how there are any courts done or legal actions taken where this has to be a standard in certain games now or not.
Yeah, you know what, Ian, you jumped ahead to actually one of our other questions, which is great, by the way, that touches into, is there actually like an objective guideline that should be followed in terms of accessibility? So great input there. I have a question also for everyone, really, as either a consumer, a researcher, someone who's working in the industry. Again, a little bit broader. We'll dig into the nitty gritty in just a bit. But for you, let's pretend like we are living in the most ideal world possible. One day, right? For you, what would the most successful form of accessibility in a game how would this take place for you? So the most successful accessibility, what would the criteria be for you as either a player or someone who's in the industry, research, etc.?
I mean, for me, I'll be honest, like, I think an example already really exists from a low vision perspective. Like, The Last of Us 2, I struggle to think of a need or that it didn't meet, or a barrier that it didn't fail to take away. I know that totally blind players still had things that they needed from it, but for me, that met my standards really, and I'm really glad that lots of people are treating it like a template, because then I'm going to get a lot of my needs met from a low vision perspective. But yeah, again, I think if we're looking for kind of the gold standard, the best standard, for me, it's that fine balance between having a preset and a customizable menu. And I know that's quite technical, but it is I came with the latest. I started playing Far Cry 6 last week. Because usually what happens in my household is my partner buys like a big blockbuster game, and I watch him play it for a bit, and we look through the menus together and see if I'm going to be able to play it, and then I buy it. Mainly because he has a chronic inability to finish any game, so that's quite useful when it's on the Xbox and we can share it. So there's that balance between immediately going into a gaming experience and having that level of access need met. Like, that is really what I want to see universally, where the minute that menu starts, like before the cutscene, before the dramatic music, before weird like CGI Keanu Reeves pops up, whatever, like having that, do you want this preset? When I opened Far Cry 6, I immediately had a menu narrator, like immediately. That's what I think we should be aiming for, is that I don't want to have to dig around in a game to be able to play it. That I think we should aim for.
Yeah, such a wonderful point. And Amy, do you also think that because this gold standard for you, or almost a gold standard, because it exists actually now, do you think that's like a positive sign of the times, that it's it's finally becoming something that's addressed not superficially but really heavily, and it's something that you already experience?
Yeah, and I think Tara's right in that the low vision and the blind folks will get a lot of the love at the moment. It is our time. The revolution has started. Soon everything will be audio described. So yeah, I think it gives me hope, and I mean it also gives me quite a lot of work, which I enjoy. So yeah, I'm available for consultancy for any other devs watching. But yeah, I think it's great. And actually, although this isn't a thing I hugely enjoy all the time, but like when The Last of Us 2 came out and there were all those videos, and you will have all seen them on social media, of blind people playing video games, like how much joy did that bring to the industry, that it was like, finally, here's this group of people that, and when I go out and about and I do other stuff, when I say I play video games as a blind person, people can't believe it, but now it's not such a far stretch of the imagination, and that makes me feel really happy.
Super wonderful. Awesome, Amy. Thank you. Anyone else? What would it, again, in a perfect world, the most ideal world we can possibly think of, what would the most successful form of accessibility look like for you?
Well,
Maybe sorry.
for me, oh,
Go
Rock,
ahead.
paper, scissors, shoot. Tim, you can go first, and then Katherine.
Yes. What I wanted to add to that is, like, for instance, because when I looked into this, on like the visual stuff, I learned that like the difference between like subtitles in video games, subtitles in movies, where for instance Netflix has like an entire guideline book of like, these are like the subtitles, this is how long they should be, this is like how many lines they should be, this is like how fast you should go to the next subtitles. And I think it would be nice if like somehow, because we're talking about utopia, right, that like all games kind of adopt the same certain types of subtitles, because games will sometimes like, because they don't want to use like a normal font, they want to use like their very fancy font that like kind of matches in the theme, But what then happens is like sometimes it's not readable, or like they'll use like white letters, and then it's like a white level, and then you look up and you're like, oh, what the hell are they saying? Like stuff like that. If it's like, it would be nice if it would be more standardized, that there's like just stuff like that. It's nice, I think.
Great. Awesome, Tim. Thank you. Katherine.
Yeah, I was just gonna say from a research perspective, if I look at it from the other end of, what kinds of experiences do players have with certain games, I think the best form of accessibility to me would be if I ran a user study that had neurodivergent people, that had blind people, that had non-disabled people, and in the end you can see that the experience is the same for everybody, regardless of their abilities. I think to me that would be fantastic. I have no idea how to get there. I think that's for a lot of us to figure out how to slowly make it there. But I think if we want a metric of success, that everybody has a positive experience, whatever that means, right? It doesn't need to be like a happy experience necessarily. And that people are made to feel welcome by the game as well, and like they belong there, and that it's not like that struggle of getting in and then questioning whether it was actually made for you. But again, lots of hard work, I think, that needs to happen until we're fully there.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question for you, Katherine, regarding the samples for the research on accessibility in games. And yeah, in a perfect world, we would have a super representative sample for this research. How does it look now with the samples and the representativeness of the sample group?
It doesn't look good in games research in general, right? Because like a lot of academic research, most of the study participants that you see are university students, basically, because that's a convenience sample. That's the people who are on campus. And sadly, you don't see a lot of disabled students on campus, at least not openly. So I think there's also an issue there.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means then is that a huge body of work about games that we have right now really just prioritizes neurotypical people, for example. We know very little about how neurodivergent people experience games and what would make it to be a better experience for that group. So yeah, I think we struggle with that. There's accessibility research on games that then specifically works with disabled people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little step, but a lot of the mainstream work is, your average university student, basically. And I think that needs to change as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. I'm so glad we have you on the panel because, yeah, the research side of this is also extremely crucial. So awesome. Thank you. Joao, anything to add? What do you think the most successful version of accessibility would look like for you as a student and also as a player of all things games?
Well, I think we already have like subtitles that are kind of pretty standardized, or at least pretty common among most games. But like Amy said, I think having good features for and presets for blind people or people who can't see as well, that's like the second biggest demographic I think you can really like help. And then from there, I think it's like remappable controls, or being able to plug in whatever controller you want, and having just the ability to customize your own experience, but also having good presets is kind of important. I think that would be perfect at least. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. So for the sake of time, I am going to jump right ahead to our next question. And so this is looking a little bit deeper. Also, we very superficially discussed this before, but studio size. So this question reads, implementing good accessibility features takes a lot of know-how and time. AAA studios have the resources to do this well if they want to. Gears 5 and The Last of Us 2 being excellent examples, but indies more than likely don't. How can accessibility in games become more well accessible to studios big and small alike? So how can this discussion of accessibility and actually the implementation of it, how could we make this possible in indie smaller studios as well?
I would love to take this one because the first step is acknowledging that question has a built-in misconception in it. It assumes that accessibility is too hard for indie studios, which is amazingly incorrect. Actually, some of the most accessible games that we see actually come out of indie studios. When you look at games like Wave the Passive Fist, which came out a few years ago, highly accessible. The game Sequence Storm, which is fully playable with no vision, is a single developer. The game Hyperdot, which was largely had a huge media push from Xbox Live, had one dev, one user research, and one marketing person. Like, so do not limit yourself because you think you can't do it because you are at a small studio. It has been done and you can do it. It is again about thinking and being intentional. If you are intentional, accessibility work doesn't add to your overall workload. Like I said, if you're doing additive accessibility, if you've gotten to the end and then you realize you made an inaccessible game, you are generating more work for yourself. But if you do it initially, you are really, really not. So just take the effort to learn. And honestly, not to be a shill for my own conference, but we have a minimum of 2 speakers from indie devs each year talking about the accessibility they did in their games and how. So if you are someone who's developing indie, go talk to other indie developers, go watch some of those talks from other indie devs and learn how they did it. And what's really great about if you're at an indie, like at a huge AAA studio, you have to sit down, you have to make the case about why it's important. You've got to do stack ranking against all these features. You have to fill out all of these documents about blah, 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 and margins and profits.
Fun paperwork, right?
Fun paperwork. At indie studios, you don't have to do that. Like, if you're just like 3 people who want to be good humans and make accessible games, like, you don't have to justify that to anyone. You can just do it. So in some ways, it can be actually easier to make accessibilities happen in indie. So like, don't get downtrodden. Don't think I'm only one person, I can't make a difference. You can. I've seen other people do it. Like, just believe in yourself. Don't shoot yourself down.
So
Sorry, that was
it's
more of
not-
like a pep talk than an answer.
No, someone says in the chat, Tara is dropping knowledge over here. Yeah, yes, she is. So I'm so glad that you bring up this point of the fact that this is actually a misconception, that you don't need this huge group of developers. In some cases, I'm hearing that also, I mean, it can be slowed down by having an extremely large team. So it's not necessarily always a resource problem. This can be done if you are intentional throughout the entire process. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And going off of that, I'm going to segue into another question about other misconceptions about accessibility in games. Whether they are misconceptions that you once had, maybe if you are just a consumer of games, misconceptions that you see as a researcher or a student or someone who works in the industry, misconceptions. Time to debunk them.
Disabled people can't play hard mode. Yeah, it's a big misconception.
Yes, would you like to elaborate on that, Amy?
I mean, I don't want to start the whole debate like easy mode versus accessibility because we might be here until, I don't know, next year. But there's a big misconception that just having an easy mode or a story mode makes things accessible. It doesn't. Like, my issue isn't that I can't, yeet enemies into the sun. It's that your UI is tiny. Like, I think Steve Saylor, who's another low vision advocate, always says, I just thought I was really bad at video games, but actually they were just really inaccessible. I'm a lot better than my sighted partner at a lot of games when the accessibility is there. As we've already established, he's quite lazy, so that's one reason. But it's just a real myth, like, oh, just pop in an easy mode for the disabled. And it's like, no, I want challenge. I just want an accessible challenge.
I highly agree on that one. If I may jump in, because there are a lot of like people, like especially younger people as well. Actually, any age range. I don't know why I added that, but who, for example, have issues with either muscles or on their hands, or have some fingers missing, who might not be able to play certain games quote unquote well. And some people, I've seen this happen before, where they wouldn't be allowed to, for example, enter esports tournaments or anything like that. But I've seen plenty of evidence of people who actually are insanely good at these games, who do sometimes make it into esports by just having a special mouse or just having some controls remapped, who can still be incredible at these type of games, more than the average person even sometimes.
Great point. So conflating difficulty and accessibility and disability, that for you, Amy, and for a lot of others, big no, because those are just simply not the same. Great point. Any other misconceptions, misunderstandings for us to debunk here? Yeah, Tara, go ahead.
I think a lot of times when people are first approaching accessibility, they're trying to think of solutions, and how to put this, like trying to think of, oh, how do we make this accessible to someone who's deaf? And they're like, everything needs to have text. And it's like, whoa, that's not what we said. That's not what we said. People think that they can come up with the solutions on their own, like rather than problem solving with a person with a disability. Like there are tons of ways that you can use in-game things that are still part of your world to solve problems that everyone will enjoy. It was kind of hit on before. It's like, for example, in Sea of Thieves, we just launched a patch where when you're turning your wheel in game, we now have like creaky sounds every quarter of a turn so that you can hear how far that you've turned it. Like a lot of people, when you go to tell them about these problems, they're like, oh, we'll have to have narrator announce every time you've done a quarter and a turn. It's like, whoa. No one asked for that. No one said they wanted that. That's not what I said. Like, and if you just ask someone who was no vision, they're like, no, I just want something that tells me audio wise. Like, you can solve these problems in a way that is inclusive and in your in-game world. And I think people just get so frustrated that they don't do that. They immediately think, like, what assistive tech can I slap on this? And that's not the solution. It's like, that's the misconception. It's not always about assistive tech, I think.
Right. And also, it's extremely important to involve, again, the individuals that are directly impacted by these accessibility features.
And like, just to add to that, to Tara's point, is that you will all have played a game and really enjoyed an accessibility feature that you did not know was an accessibility feature. Like, you will. The way that aiming has evolved in gaming has often come from developments of auto aim and snap and stuff. But like, these were things that were designed originally as accessibility features, and now they're built into like weapon wheels without you even realizing that in that PvP game where you prefer a particular gun, it's because it's had an auto aim kind of, it's like, oh, it's got a slightly better aim developed from auto aims. Like, those things exist. Like in State of Spider-Man and Miles Morales, the pinging backpacks, the collectibles that you can find a lot more easily, that's an accessibility feature. And it's just, everyone thinks there's a myth that it's always got to be this like big clunky special needs thing. It's not. It's just making, you can build it into the world and make it much more enjoyable. And if anything, that's, sometimes I do need like very technical things. I need a bigger UI scale, I need a wayfinding support. But actually, there's so many things that, and I talked to devs about this. I said, there's things you build into the game that everyone enjoy. The little Tweety bird in Ghost of Tsushima, little Tweety bird that pops up and tells you where the things are. Access feature. It's an access feature. It's developed as an access feature. But yeah, everyone's used it.
Amazing. So actually, we aren't aware necessarily of these things that really are there for accessibility. So again, it seems like the way has been paved already significantly. Great. One more question, actually, before we jump into the audience Q&A, because I'm seeing a lot of questions being asked in the chat. Super awesome questions, some of them. So please also, if you would like to submit a question, don't forget to do so. Just put a Q beforehand. Last question before we jump into that. And this is actually a question from Ian. So Ian was really interested in the question of accessibility evolving in virtual reality. And it's been said that this is more so a bit difficult than in a traditional game. So the question of accessibility in VR and also as far as also the metaverse, if anyone would like to touch on that.
Kind of first extend onto that as well, if I may, something that is interesting to note is how the accessibility, it splits it up into a different target group, because it's like a double-edged sword. you have a lot of people who, for example, older people who have never played games in their life before, who get to experience games like they couldn't before, such as how the Nintendo did the Wii back in the day. You only have to move the controller, and which makes it more accessible for older people, which is incredible. However, you have a new accessibility problem where a lot of people might get motion sickness, so it's kind of like a double-double. And I'm very interested in how that could be tackled, or how just any discussion around that.
I think VR is like a super tough one, actually. Last year we wrote an entire paper, which is really just a long rant on how inaccessible the platform is. And basically, what you can do is there's a concept from disability studies. It's from Fiona Campbell, and she calls it the Corporal Standard, which is like an ideal human body that like most of us do not have, right? Like it just doesn't exist except for in some people's minds. And when you compare that and what is expected by VR from a human body, you can show that like at every single step of these systems, you have to have that ideal body to have the ideal experience. So in the end, I want to say we have to tear it down and we have to build it back up from the bottom with the involvement of disabled people to get to a point where we can even begin to talk about the accessibility of applications on it. And that's why I feel very conflicted about the metaverse, because as it stands right now, it will just exclude an entire demographic from possibly enjoying what it has to offer. So lots of work. Again,
Yeah,
like, I don't know
I
if anyone
definitely agree
would
with
like
that.
hop in with like pathways to solutions, but it's not straightforward. So the more body-based it gets, I think the harder it becomes to address all of those access needs that different individuals might have.
I think price range is also a big one to make it more accessible, because it's still very pricey for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, and for example, that was a big topic of discussion during the metaverse stream that we had as well. It was said that the metaverse isn't necessarily virtual reality, but yeah, since that stream, I've also had a lot of conversations with some other people that. I mean, there's an overlap between the two, and there are these accessibility issues. It's interesting also to note this is not about disability, but it also got me thinking when you put this question in, because I remember, and this has to do with Catherine, that idea of the perfect body, that again really exists in our minds. Some of our students were play testing actually their VR game that they were developing as part of a group project, and I got a call that they needed me for something, and I was like, oh, interesting, because I don't know. For those out there on Twitch, I do not have a background in games.
Was it the
Whatsoever.
wheelchair one, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Was it the wheelchair one?
No, it was not. It was
it was
not.
a different one.
No,
I
it was a
remember
different
why
game.
they asked you is a very good
Yeah, so
story.
I was like, I don't have a background in games at all. Why do they need my help, and like how can I help them? So I went out to take a look, and yeah, they needed a short person to test if their game worked on a short person. You can't see on the internet, I am extremely short. I haven't quite made it to 5 feet yet. That's in American measurements. And it didn't. So I think it was, I had to put my hands in a certain location, and I couldn't because I was too short, and there was no way for me to play the game. It's a bug that they ended up fixing it. So I mean, it's super important that they actually took this into consideration, and they asked me to come test it, because it brought this to light that
That's
maybe
exactly what I mean. It's kind of a double-edged. It gives a whole new age group or target group. It can enjoy games they couldn't before, but it addresses a whole bunch of new physical, mainly, but also like mental issues on how it can close more groups as well, which is very interesting.
Anyone else would like to add to that before we jump into the audience Q&A?
Yeah, I think just in general that when you look at VR, it's like, well, you have the same disability considerations you would have for like a real world building, but also there's more things like the sense of touch in VR currently does not really exist. So for people who are mainly relying on that to find things, it's like, yeah, good luck like, doing that in VR. But then it's also interesting because when you take into consideration those kinds of disabilities, it also makes for a better design for abled people. Like I remember a VR game where the controller would vibrate when you were near an item, so I could find that behind my back. I can't see it, not because I'm blind, but because it's behind my back. So those kinds of design elements can be interesting, like yeah, are very difficult just to explore and solve, I think, because of VR. Yeah.
Interesting point, Joel. Thank you. All right. If I could just ask for the audience questions. Awesome, awesome. They are appearing on my screen slowly but surely. Awesome. Okay, so the first question from our audience reads, do accessibility teams ever work with story teams to point out cliches, stereotyping, and poor representations of disabled characters and story elements?
I mean, they should do more, to be honest. There was some really interesting research by a disability charity in the UK called Scope, and they looked at representations of disabled people in games. And if you are disabled in a game, by the end, you are overwhelmingly likely to be dead or cured. So, yeah, it would be nicer to see some more realistic representation. And like just disability out of the context of like, I'm a soldier man with a metal arm. Like like a real disabled person would be quite nice.
Right.
And also like if there's young people, I say this from the bottom of my heart. There is anything you can take away from today, it is learn, for Christ's sake, learn how to draw a wheelchair. Like, look at wheelchairs. Like, actually look at wheelchairs. Don't look at like an oldie-timey Victorian like woodcut of a wheelchair. Look at wheelchairs that actual human beings use. Don't be like, oh, well, I'm just going through my wheelchair. Oh, creepy horror chair. Yeah, I'll put a person in that. That looks fun. No. Learn how to draw wheelchairs, for the love of God.
And
Okay,
and to go on the wheelchair tangent, hospital wheelchairs are not the same as daily use wheelchairs. And so when you put someone in a hospital wheelchair, we know you didn't do your research. We don't appreciate it.
We know.
Sorry.
We know.
So
we literally
DIE
see that.
students, this is a good idea for drawing assignments. Every DIE student out there, draw a wheelchair. Awesome.
I'll hide as a game dev. I don't need to.
Yeah.
I think I
Not
actually
for
remember an
Ian.
interesting
Not
thing
for
where
Ian.
I'm not for-
In Wolfenstein 2, you had like you start in a wheelchair, and of course, yeah, you get cured, which is like, of course they do that. But I find it really interesting that people were complaining about like, oh, the first level's in a wheelchair, and it's so difficult to get around. It's like, yeah, that's how people in actual wheelchairs feel like for the rest of their lives. Like now you know how it feels for once. And I thought it was very interesting to play as well, because it's like, yeah, this seems very difficult to live with. Like I hadn't experienced that before, hadn't like broken a leg before or something. So I think in that sense, representation is not just interesting for people who are themselves disabled, but also for other people to better understand, like, okay, these people have to live with this for like, not just during the game, but like forever. And having that visibility about it also helps, hopefully, to inspire other developers to kind of put in more accessibility features and just think more about those things. So I think that's really cool.
I think that's a challenging one, though, to some extent. So I think you're right. I agree. Like it's really good to have that representation, but I think it needs to be respectful in the sense that, as a wheelchair user, I'm an expert wheelchair user, and I'm actually really good at what I'm doing. And so if a game then gives the idea of, oh, disability as a tragedy, I think that then also is the wrong trope. So I think as a developer, think about how you portray disability, right? Because that's somebody's life, basically. That's a human being with lots of other parts to themselves as well. So I think it's quite challenging to get it right. And there again, lived experience matters and can be very helpful actually in making sure you're getting those parts right as well.
I agree with
Yeah.
Catherine, because I think that there was the really good example of that is the veil shadow of the crown. This is my second assignment to all you students out there. Go and play the veil shadow of the crown if you want to learn anything about like audio design. And for me, it was fascinating to play that game as a blind person, because obviously it's an audio game and it's accessible to me. But also, like when I was streaming it, I could explain like, oh, okay, so this is how I find things. This is what it feels like, because there's lots of scenes in busy, loud environments, and you have to pick out a particular sound to go and like find an objective, find a quest, etc. And people found that really illuminating, but in a positive way, because it was part of a story and you're playing a blind character and it's a well-built world. So yeah, I agree. I think there's ways of doing that inclusion that actually makes disability an enjoyable part of the gameplay rather than making it like, "Bah, bah, bah, bah.
Right.
Isn't it sad?"
Wah, wah,
Yeah.
wah.
You
Yeah,
can't
exactly.
do stairs, level down. Like, we don't
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah,
And it
and
should
I
be
can say
equally
that
as exciting and fun.
yeah, and I can say that like me and other people who work on my accessibility team, like we do some consulting on story and narrative, but like frankly, that is not my story to tell. I will check you against some like absolute things that I can tell you are way off the rails, but like we need people with disabilities to be able to tell their own stories in gaming. They need to work in gaming to tell those stories. If you need to enable other people with disabilities to tell their stories if they're not a game dev. So rather than being an able-bodied person waking up and being like, I want to tell the story of insert random disability, you have to work with the community to understand and get those stories. Nothing about us without us. Amy was just talking about the Veil, and the Veil partnered with blind gamers to be able to tell the story of a blind character. So don't try to like it is not your lived experience. That's like you are literally just making it up based on things that you have seen, which are probably incorrect because just like the research that Katherine just highlighted, or Amy, one of them brought up like research that it was Scope, wasn't it, with the representation, that like the representation isn't good. And so if you are basing your story off the representations that you're seeing in media right now, they are bad. So don't do that. Talk to people, get their lived experience.
Nothing about us without us. I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
And I'm
it's
so
from
glad
the
that you just said that.
yeah, it's from the disability rights movement that started in Berkeley in California in the 80s and early 70s. Yeah, nothing about us without us. It's like the disability rights movement
Hmm,
principle. Yeah.
awesome.
Though I would say on the lived experience thing, from the Veil perspective, I have not like burned any goblins with fire recently. That was more of a that was like a good gaming. I hope to acquire that skill. I'm waiting for it.
You'll get
Maybe
there.
I'll get now. I've got the guide dog. Now I'll get the like goblin burning soon. I hope.
We
I think
believe
it's
in
also
you.
a
Thank
good
you.
example to show that it's like how many games have consulted like former soldiers for their millions modern military game, and then how many studios have contacted like a person in a wheelchair, or like consulted them when they have a character in their game in a wheelchair. I think that disparity there is very apparent.
I know I'm dominating a bit, so I will shut up soon. But like, just to add to that, pay people. Like, don't make people work for free. I understand there's some student projects that I will do for free because you're students and you don't have budgets, but no one's asking you to do your job for free in your studio. It's not like somebody says, "Oh, hi, could you just like design a whole game for free?" Or no one asks your accountant to do it for free, or your plumber. They don't come in and go, "Oh, well, we're a really small indie studio, so could you just like fix all our pipes for free, please?" Don't do the same to disabled people because, we have a lot of knowledge to share.
Great point. Thank you, Amy. And I also have one more question for Amy before we continue on to another. Actually, well, this is also relevant, totally. The Lunicorn asks, where did you get that dinosaur bag?
It was a gift. I'll have to Google it, but yeah, it's my little Stegosaurus handbag.
I also love that bag.
All my Stegosaurus needs.
The Lunicorn, I am sorry, it was gifted. Alrighty, on to the next question from the audience. I see a question about esports, which, shameless plug, is a topic for our April stream. So be here on Twitch the 20th of April for our talk on esports. Anyway, back to the question. Is there a possibility that they would make a separate esports for physically disabled people, like is being done with the Olympics? So he's referring to the Paralympics. Anyone would like to touch on that? That's a very interesting question.
I can touch on that a little bit.
Sure.
So it's first important to recognize like there are already some events that do exist, like the Special Olympics does have a gaming circuit that at least runs here in the US. So some of them do already exist. But in most cases, there really isn't a need for it. And again, there's this idea that people with disabilities need easier mode or something like that where they can't compete, and that's inaccurate. If someone is playing with an Xbox adaptive controller, there's no reason they can't play against someone with a regular controller. Literally, the game can't tell the difference. A lot of accessibility tools that people use don't actually impact gameplay. Making the mini map larger isn't going to change how I'm playing. Um, and if you go and you look like especially in fighting games, like there are major competitive players who have limited mobility. There are sponsored deaf esport players in first person shooters like Ewok. He is a competitive Fortnite player. Like he does not need to be in a separate league. So I don't think it will ever come about, because aside from some very specific examples that are also accounting for things like in the Special Olympics where there are additional cognitive challenges and tandem play, I don't think that it's needed. So like I don't see it forming.
So the question for you, Tara, there's not so much a need for it with the accessibility features that currently exist, and with the intention also of the esports league, and also it's a question of inclusivity in general, more so than creating a separate group for those with accessibility needs.
Yeah, I mean, and frankly, if you ask like gamers with disabilities, like, do you want your own league? Which is where we should start anyway. Like, they're not going to say that they want their own league. They want to play with everyone else. Like, that's what all of us as gamers want. We want to play with everyone else.
Right.
I agree with that. I think the big difference as well is between Olympics and, for example, games is in Olympics, the reason why there's a special category is because usually most of the cases these are physical disabilities. For example, people with wheelchairs, they have to, actually do physical activity with the wheelchair, and they're unable to participate in the normal racing. However, people who may have other disabilities to play games, games is all about inclusivity, like you mentioned before. And if you can just as well play the game better, then, for example, someone has a handicap and they can still play the game better than like an average normal person, so to speak, who doesn't have this handicap. Why not enjoy it? Like, let them enjoy and put them with our esports. I think it would be kind of weird even. It's like if you were to put them in a separate category, it's almost like watching monkeys play in a zoo or whatever. Like, it's kind of a very morally weird thing to think about if you were to put specifically people in his own category for this. Whilst for the Olympic, it's only so that's actually accessible for them so they can enjoy a race.
I also think this is a question that we can ask in a lot of different domains, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, but that happens everywhere. Like, we
Yeah.
have special schools, we have special buses, we have special jobs. Like, we get kind of siloed off all the time. So yeah, that's why I agree with Tara of saying, actually, don't put us in like some special club. Just include us. Include us in your game. We want to play your game too.
Right.
Yeah, and that's
Can I
why
also
the
ask
big
something?
difference in. Oh, sorry, go on, Tim.
No, I just wanted to add that, like, let's say in like a hypothetical world where we are like, oh, let's make a different league for non-able bodied people. Like, there are so many different types of disabilities, and they're like so varied that like you would then have to like start dividing up, like, okay, we're having a league for the blind people, a league for the hard hearing people, a league for people with like motoristic issues, and then like, like it kind of, I don't know, I don't see it working out that way. It's like, yeah.
I think the intention, it comes from a positive place in most cases.
Mhm.
However, when you look into it a bit further, the execution, there are, I think, a lot of flaws that would come along with that. And I think the more important question is not how to make a different group, but okay, we have one group to begin with. How do we make this group the most inclusive as it possibly can be? So I think it's actually like missing the question in the first place.
Yeah.
But enough
Just
for me. Stop talking,
How
moderator.
Tara mentioned in the beginning, like when there is a need for it. I think when there would be exception is we could have esports specifically for games catered for people with disabilities. If it's a game made for example, blind people, you could have blind people compete with each other in the game made for blind people. That would be more of a I think a nicer thing rather than have blind people, for example. Oh, you have Fortnite for just esports, and then we have like a separate Fortnite category in esports for blind people. No, have a game representing for the blind people that they can be proud of and then shine it through.
Yeah, and one more thing for that, I think it will be way more interesting that instead of like taking those people that have those issues with certain games and like putting them separately, that would be way more interesting to try to give them the tools and like the little things that they need to then just at least get on the same playing field and then be able to compete with other people who might not have those same types of issues.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are real life examples of that exact scenario that have already happened. So I talked before about Ewok, who's a sponsored esports player. Ewok is deaf, and when Ewok first started playing Fortnite, like they have amazing reactions, they can aim, like they're killing it. But that wouldn't stop someone from being able to sneak up on Ewok because Ewok couldn't hear the footsteps. So Fortnite introduced the audio visualizer, a visual way to indicate audio on screen. It shows where treasures are, it shows when a car is driving near you, it shows where footprints are, and probably some other stuff I'm forgetting, but visually it started to give those indications. So now Ewok was able to get all of that information that he couldn't previously have. And once Ewok got the visualizer, because Ewok already had this amazing set of skills and now had the same set of information as everyone else, Ewok did even better. Like literally when the scenario you're describing happens, it just means that like some of these people who were pretty good before become like, I'm not gonna cuss, awesome.
Dolphin noises.
Just mouth noises. And like, that's like, I used to, back at the dawn of time, I played fighting games competitively. Not well, but still competitively. They can be two different things. But like one of my friends, he literally plays video games with his face. Like he has like a controller like turned sideways on his face because he doesn't have the use of his hands. When he has a game that allows him to remap controls, like we can be pretty even matched in fighting games. And then if he can remap his controls to be the best case scenario, it's really hard for me to win. And like again, it was you gave him the tool and he went from being pretty good to wiping the floor with you. Like that's it.
Mm-hmm. It's just
Yeah,
it sounds
and to
like.
add to
Go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, and I wanted to say to add to the control to the face thing. I know a while back there was like this streamer who played League of Legends, and he wasn't able. He was paralyzed, I think, and he wasn't able to use his hands or anything like that. So he literally had a voice commanding where he would say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it would like use the ability, so like move somewhere, and it would like look in a direction and walk there. And this guy was like higher ranked than like most of my friends who have like all the normal tools. So it's not like they can't compete if they're not like if they are given the tools, they definitely can compete.
And I also think it again plays back into the question and what we talked about before. Amy brought it up about conflating difficulty with disability and accessibility. I think it all circles back to that same misconception that it's just not the same thing. All right, on to the next question. I see that we only have a couple more minutes left. Time flies during Game for Thought panels. 2 more questions I think we'll be able to get to. I see a question. Are there any good online resources that developers with no disability can use for accessibility? So for developers that don't share these experiences themselves, are there any good online resources that they could turn to? This is actually from one of our teachers at DIE that submitted this. So this will be very helpful for our team as well. Any resources that you all share? I think Twitch doesn't allow, if you put a link in the chat, it gets funky, just a bunch of stars come up. So if any resources are shared, I will share them on both the Facebook and the LinkedIn. So just take a look later for that.
Yeah, I mean, Tara, go promo yourself, damn it.
Yeah,
Woo,
well,
woo.
so first off, again, the Game Accessibility Conference is happening April 11th and 12th, and it is free. You get to hear all sorts of different details. You get to hear stories literally from people with disabilities, like Amy's hosting a panel where it's a panel of low vision gamers talking about what gaming is like for them. But you also have development stories from everything from AAA to indie about what they did, how they did it, why they did it the way they did, and everything else. Additionally, there are different learning paths out there. So there are things like the Game Accessibility Guidelines, which is literally gameaccessibilityguidelines.com. And that was a group of guidelines put together by industry professionals with tons of examples. But there are also things like through Microsoft, like we have the Gaming Fundamentals Accessibility Learning course, which is an online training program that you can take and learn more. And we will have additional ones in the future. So right now it's just introductory. But then there's also, Microsoft accessibility guidelines. There are tutorials from Epic. They are all over. I think Unreal has they did a full stream about how to use the accessibility features that they have built in their engine to create accessible experiences. I mean, you can just start Googling them. But I just listed off 7.
So they're out
Also,
there.
all of the game accessibility talks from the conference from all years previously are online. That's 5, 6, however many years we've been doing this conference. All of the talks are free online, so you can even go back through the archive to find out what you want.
And you can watch Amy's talk as well.
Yeah, I've done a couple talks, haven't I? I've done 2, I think. I did hi, I'm blind, I play video games, and then I did one about wayfinding.
And then you were a guest in another talk. You had a little clip in.
Oh yes, and
someone
then I did
else's.
a hype reaction to another talk. Yes. I would also say follow disabled gamers. We're very chatty, we're very nice. We enjoy playing our games. We enjoy showing you stuff that we're playing. Follow our streams. We've now got the disability tag on Twitch. We're a lovely community. We're very welcoming, and we love to tell you what we're doing and why we're doing it. And our streams are always really inclusive spaces because we like breaks and we like taking things at a steady pace. And it's usually a really nice community to be part of. So, follow some disabled streamers and, look at our communities, look who else we follow, and just watch us play games because that'll teach you a lot.
Plug that Twitch, Amy. Plug those social medias.
I can't link in the chat.
We'll share it. Take a look at our LinkedIn, Game for Thought. This is actually new as from this month, I believe, or possibly last month. My concept of time is non-existent at this point. However, we have a LinkedIn. So if you want to follow the most up-to-date information, of course, you can go onto the DIE website, and that's digitalartsandentertainment.be. And then you should be able to find the Game for Thought link at the bottom. All the information will be on there, and then the LinkedIn in terms of all of these resources that were just shared. Awesome. I think we have time for a closing word now. So in closing, in convincing people out there that this really is something to not only be aware of, but it's also something to act on. If you are a developer or even a game player, this is something that you can raise awareness about at the very least. So any closing words about the importance of accessibility in games? Also, just a very quick point. It's interesting, super interesting to note that in the GDC, the Game Developers Conference, their State of the Industry report, this year was the very first year that when game developers were asked if they integrated accessibility features in their games, more game devs answered yes than any other response. And this is the very first time that has happened since the report started, since this question was involved in the report since 2019. So clearly the tides are turning, which is a great sign. Any last words to convince the public that this is important?
Honestly, the reason that we're all here is because we love video games. We know that the impact video games have on our life, socially, creatively, but also the other things that we experience, just like literal happiness. And when you think about how video games have become a huge part of our culture, everyone knows about video games. Even my mom is addicted to Candy Crush on her phone. Like, video games are a huge part of the world. And it is unfair to exclude people from that. We love games because we know how amazing they are. Think of the joy that you get and think about how it would feel if someone just did purposely said that you couldn't play. That's how it can feel when that happens. So be intentionally inclusive. Allow people to feel that same love and joy that you get while playing video games, because it's amazing. It's so much fun. Like, just let everyone get to be part of it. Also, the more people we have in multiplayer games, the shorter our matchmaking queue. So if you need that, I'm just gonna throw that in there too.
Most importantly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you
And to
so much,
kinda
Tara.
Yeah, and to kind of quickly add on to that, not only is it like sad for the people that like they're not getting those options, but it's also like the game developers themselves, they're missing out on such a big pool of like new customers, the people who like give you money for the games and are the reason you keep making these games. So by just like making it more accessible, you're also increasing like the amount of people who could potentially play your game and enjoy it. So it's a win-win kind of.
Yep, and it also, I think we've talked about this before, diverse storytelling also, it adds to the value. It only makes for better games as well. So it's, it's a great point. It's really useful for the developer as well. Awesome.
I also want to add on that. There's another thing is that that is very nice is how accessibility or disabilities are also being represented in games, and how I think they should definitely there should be certain stories and maybe push more about how people live with certain disabilities, or make them experience what it's like to live with these certain disabilities, to not only have those people experience games, but that we can also use the media of games to tell how they experience things that we cannot experience, which I think is very important.
Great point, Ian. Katherine, any final words for our audience out there?
I think if you're a game student and you're still not convinced that accessibility matters, look at the amount of jobs that have recently come up in this area. So if you want to do one thing for your employability, educate yourselves about the topic.
Such a great point. Thank you so much, Katherine. Joao, any last words?
Adding or thinking about how you can make games better for disabled gamers also benefits non-disabled gamers. So it's good for everyone. Adding subtitles or a ping system or all of these things, they help everyone play the game better and enjoy it more.
Great point, Joao. Thank you so much. And a great way to round off your third Game for Thought stream. Woohoo! Welcome back. All right, Amy, final words.
A lot already. I just agree with what everyone has already said. Like, I want to play your games. I'm excited. Like, you're a whole new generation of people going out there making games. I want to play them. Let me play them. I just want to be part of it. Guide Dog Ava has no further comments either. I'm afraid she's very much asleep.
Guide Dog Ava is like, okay, mom.
Whatever. Hang on, I'm gonna rustle the treat packet. That might wake her up. Ava, you want a snack? What's that? Go over there. There you go. He's like, yes.
If you get anything out of this stream, Guide Dog Ava really likes the sound of her snack package.
There you go.
Apparently. Alrighty, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for tonight. If your question was not answered during this panel, I'm very sorry. We tried to get to all the questions, but unfortunately, sometimes there are just so many lovely questions in the chat that we can't always get to. The good thing is we also have a podcast, a Game for Thought podcast that also streams. It comes out on Spotify every month, so I always hold on to the questions in the chat on Twitch, and that way we can funnel them into the podcast that is available on Spotify also monthly. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I really appreciate your very insightful inputs here, and we had a lot of fun, right? We had a good time. Amy, Joao, Catherine, Ian, Tara, and Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone out there on Twitch, make sure to stick around for just a couple more minutes, and I'll give you some more information about the next Game for Thought stream next month and some exciting things to look out for. But amazing. Everyone give a round of applause, virtual applause, to our lovely panelists in the chat. They were so awesome tonight. We really appreciate your time. Alrighty, everyone, I will see you in just a couple minutes. Hang tight. See you soon. All right, everyone, thank you so very much for joining us yet again here on Twitch for another awesome Game for Thought stream. Make sure to check out, as I mentioned before, our podcast that is available on Spotify. Every month, we also come out with a different topic and we discuss it over there on Spotify. So go check it out. You can see all the information Game for Thought related on our website, digitalartsandentertainment.be. Also, check out our Facebook page and our LinkedIn. I'm done with plugging for the moment. The next Game for Thought stream, make sure to mark it already on your calendars for the 16th of March. Can't believe we are already almost in March, and we will be focusing on dark design patterns in games. So that one is definitely shaping up to be a super interesting conversation. So make sure to check us out on Twitch yet again. Thank you to everyone at the Digital Arts and Entertainment team who makes this happen. Thank you to Carlos and Sandra who are in the back right now, helping us out, making this possible, making sure any technical difficulties are at a minimum. And also Jan. Jan is also over here helping us out as well. Thank you. Thank you to Master Chief as well, our academic director, Rick, if you are watching this. Thank you also for making this happen. Quindo, also, and the Vloms Audiovisual Fund. Thank you for watching. We can't wait to see you next time again on the 16th of March right here on Twitch. And keep these topics in mind, especially from tonight. Keep these insights in mind in terms of accessibility in games. If you are a DIE student that is watching this, use this as food for thought as you work on assignments and you also go throughout your studies. I just realized I said food for thought. That was a very unintentional pun. All right, to everyone, have a wonderful night. Thank you for coming out to Twitch yet again, and we will see you in March. Have a great night, everyone.